Thanks for watching live or listening back to this show from Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Points of View on Teachers Talk Radio, the show where we dive into the biggest opinions from the week gone by in education. I'm joined by Carl and Lucy this morning, and we're going to thrash it out around two big stories from the week, two things that were making the headlines and making people talk. How are you two this morning? Okay.
Yeah, good, thank you.
Excellent. Well, before we get into it, just a big shout out to our two sponsors on the show this morning, which is Hachette Learning and AQA. We're going to hear more about those two later on. Right. Well, let's start. We're going to start with the big headline making news this week. The Great Academies Trust, Great Schools Trust, are introducing Deepfake teacher avatars in a plan to help pupils catch up. The teachers will use deepfake technology to create an AI avatar of themselves to deliver catch-up lessons for pupils who've missed school. Staff at the trust will create the avatars, which look and sound just like them, using an AI video generator, and they'll be used to set out content that children have missed, for example, when they've been absent or been suspended. Carl. Oh, and we've got Yasmin.
Morning, guys.
Yasmin.
Morning.
Okay.
I'm good.
I have just read out the amazing story, Yasmin, about the deepfake AI avatars that are being used by a trust. Now, Carl, I was going to start with you. Carl,
first of all, Tom, I'd like to just check that I am actually talking to Tom and not an avatar.
Carl, that's the first thing you've said in a year that's been mildly funny. So I want to really congratulate you on that.
Thank you for that. I think that was a compliment, but I'm not 100% sure. I will continue nevertheless. The truth is with this kind of thing that your first reaction is that it just looks a little bit creepy. I think we're all programmed. Humans generally, I think, are programmed to be slightly repelled by anything that looks like a human but isn't a human. It's the kind of staple of horror movies, isn't it? To have dolls that come to life and clowns that are evil and things like that. So I think there is to a degree a sort of natural, you step back and you think, blimey, that doesn't really strike me as particularly good. I mean, there are a whole host of issues, obviously, and I do wonder whether this particular trust, with due respect, have got half a mind on just sort of, kind of promoting the concept for their own benefit in order to get their name out there, which they've done successfully, as opposed to actually making it a serious proposal. But I mean, I suppose it raises a bigger question, doesn't it? About the extent to which this kind of stuff can be used in an effective way in a classroom. There's lots of these we can go into. I don't want to take up too much time at the start, but I would say my instinct overall is that it's a little bit of a gimmick, and that in truth, its actual advantage to a young person's learning is quite limited. In other words, we can argue about the legalities or the ethical nature of it, but actually, in practice, its main drawback is not probably going to make much of a difference to anything.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I feel as though they're looking to use technology because it exists, not because there's a problem that needs to be solved by technology in this instance. I mean, if you look at children who've been off school, long-term sick, receiving treatment for an illness or for other, issues, generally their education is covered as best as it can be during that period of time, and they are offered opportunities for tutoring and things afterwards as well to catch up. And actually the idea of putting some avatar in just gives a message of you're not so important, we haven't got time for you with your needs. Do you see what I mean? And I find that a little bit of a sort of a turn off, I guess. And then in addition, you've got, when you've got, everybody's been off sick for some reason or another for a few days or a week, and you have a choice, and we have to allow young people to make choices. You find out what you missed and you try and catch up, or if you're given the work that you missed, if teachers say, look, I've got this, we were doing this, have a look at these questions, come and see me if you've got any problems, then obviously at that stage you have a choice whether you want to do that or not. And most students don't, to be fair. So if you provide this avatar and if you put in this technology, are they all going to be sat there in front of it and saying, well, this is it, it's not even a real teacher, but I'm really going to listen to this? And then the students who've been excluded are already rejecting education to some extent or another, so they're unlikely to be looking for this. At my school, we had a catch-up session. So we had Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 catch-up sessions, so 2 evenings a week. If you had a long enough lunch break, which schools do not have, or most schools don't anymore, then you could do it over lunch. And then those children who are engaged, who do want to understand something that they've missed out on, they can attend those kind of sessions.
But isn't that staff who have to deliver those?
Well, it is, but teaching is teaching, and you don't do it to find the shortcuts and the easy way out.
But that's not teaching lessons, though. That's additional catch-up sessions. That's interventions and catch-up sessions outside of timetable time, isn't it? In addition.
So do you believe that should no longer happen, and that only teaching?
I didn't say that. I just asked you if within these sessions it was teachers delivering them.
Well, so yeah, it would be. Of course it would.
Yeah, so that's, in my opinion, that's going into their lunchtime. It's going into their after school. It's cutting into the time that they have. So that would be my only thing. It's additional work in addition to what they're already doing to teach the lessons.
Okay.
So I don't know if I would. Yeah, I mean, I just don't know if I would sort of just say, oh yeah, the teachers should do it, as in like, yeah, it's all good.
It is, Tom,
because it's like every minute matters in the sense of how stretched some teachers are. So it's like, I don't know if, and I mean, I personally, this story, I don't have a huge issue with it. I don't, because it's catch up. If it was lessons, maybe that would be slightly different. If it was something where it's actually a timetable part of a child's curriculum. This is for kids who've been absent. They come in. Now, usually, let's say a child's been absent and there isn't any intervention or tutoring available, which sometimes there isn't, then they're going to be given work to take home to do. This is just an addition to that work. So instead of giving somebody a booklet or giving someone the photocopies of what you did last lesson, you're also saying, oh, by the way, there's a video of me talking about it, and here it is, for you to also engage with.
Yeah, I would take a little bit of issue with that, Tom, in that, yes, it is just an introduction, and yes, it does free up the teacher in theory from doing whatever work they would do during the lunchtime or yes, in theory, but in practice, what's the point? Because if that's all it's doing, it's a very small gain for a very big set of problems, which are legal, ethical, and also potentially a little bit confusing for some children. So I think if that's all that it does, it's a relatively tiny gain for an awful lot of big questions, and I'm not sure really whether therefore it's likely to be taken up beyond just out of curiosity or the odd occasion.
I actually agree. I mean, I agree with what you're both saying in terms of it being, maybe sort of small fry in the big scheme of things, but I also think that I sort of see technology as, in the longer term, in the medium and long term, I just think that technology is never going to be as good as a human teacher, right? So a technological replacement for a teacher is never going to be as good as a human teacher, in my opinion. But sometimes for me, we have to take a hit on the quality of what we're doing to enable more teachers to stay in the profession and have a better chance of staying in the profession, which is where I think technology comes in, whether that be in the domain of marking, whether it be in the domain of catch-up work, whether it be in the domain of whatever technology can do. And it may not be at that 100% level of a human being, but let's say it's at 70% of a human being. Now, I personally, I don't think that children engage that well with technology now because they've been so saturated with it during COVID and since COVID. But then all I'm looking at is what is sort of better than nothing, or I just think this could be a complement to work that's set. I'm not saying it's like the be all and end all and an answer, but is it better to have that than not?
I think teachers want their time freed up from pointless admin tasks, from adding the marks into the system, for sort of overall analysis, things like that. I don't think teachers want less contact time. I think most people go into teaching because they want to share their knowledge with students. And I don't think I can't think that anyone would begrudge doing one Tuesday after school every 3 or 4 weeks to run the catch-up session. Do you see what I mean? I would.
Unless it was potentially, because that's once a month where I'm staying late and it's not something that is part of my job. It's in addition. I mean, if I want to do it, I think that's different. If a child says to me, "Can you help me out, Mr. Rogers, at the end of the lesson and explain this to me?" Yeah, absolutely fine. We'll do that into lunch. But as a set additional intervention session, when teacher hours are already at breaking point, then I think every hour counts.
Sure.
Can I say?
Yasmin, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, can I say, I feel like a big part of this comes from the fact that teachers just don't have the time to help pupils catch up anymore. I think a lot of schools have kind of now gone down this route where they do learning walks, and it's really praised if you go into lesson after lesson and teachers are not only using the exact same resources, but they're on the exact same part of a particular slide. Like I've joined a learning walk where staff have been praised for even being on the same sentence when we've walked into 2 different, I think it was geography lessons, and it was seen as basically equalizing the learning for pupils, that teachers were on the exact same part of a sentence, and so for me, I feel like it comes from the fact that, like, when I was at school, it was normal if you missed a day of school for your teacher to have time in a lesson to even tell you what you've missed, or maybe get you some worksheets that you've missed, or maybe direct you to part of a textbook that you need to get through and catch up on before you get up to speed in the lesson. But I don't think a lot of those things happen in big, academy trusts chains or whatever anymore. I think that there is no time to help somebody catch up. I feel like it's now an inconvenience if somebody's missed your lesson, because it kind of affects the present and what's expected of that 1 hour or however long the lesson is. So for me, I feel like it kind of comes from that. And I feel like it's being sold as reducing teacher workload, but I don't really think it is. I just kind of feel like it's kind of putting a plaster on a wider workload problem and kind of diverting attention away from the fact that teachers just don't have time for something like helping a pupil catch up. But if that was kind of talked about openly, I feel like it would be controversial. But also another thing, one last thing I wanted to say, and I feel like this is going to annoy Tom, but I feel like it reminded me of social theory. And I know, because I'm a science teacher, I don't know, I'm very interested in social theories, and it reminded me of this social theory about the is it called the, I think it's called the panopticon. It's about like a circular prison where it's built like in like a circle. I think it's like a Foucault theory, and there's like a guard in a tower right in the middle. And so I think all the prisoners were told that the guard could be watching them at any time, but the prisoners won't know when the guards are actually watching them in the tower. And I think the result of that was that behavior amongst the prisoners improved all the time because they didn't know when they were being watched. And so for me, it just kind of reminded me that maybe children will respond better if they recognize or if they feel like they're being watched by their teachers at school. And that probably could have a positive impact on their engagement with the technology. So on those grounds, I feel like I don't really have a problem with it either. But I do agree with Carl and Lucy in that I do agree with Lucy that teachers don't want less contact time. And I do agree with Carl as well that some schools just kind of like want to put their name out there. And I don't know, I don't really
agree with
feel
that
like
bit.
I don't feel like it comes from wanting to really reduce workload for teachers. I think it's because workload is impossible. But I do also feel like the children probably will engage better if they feel like they're being watched by a familiar face. Like during COVID, when I taught live lessons, you know, the kids were all on Google Docs and things like that. I used to just pop in every now and there and just leave a comment while in the middle of them typing their work. And I'd write stuff like, I can see what you're doing, you know, make sure you finish it. And I just did it to kind of amuse them, or maybe even amuse myself really, and just make sure that they were doing their work. So I do feel like if it means children will engage better with their work just because they saw a familiar face, then fine, I don't have a problem. But I am very suspicious of the intentions behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say, Yasmin, I think you're absolutely right about the, you know, about the issues that you've outlined there. I think it's fair to say that let me make it quite plain. I'm not an opponent at all of technology in education. I think it has an important part to play, and I think that it would be ludicrous for us to reject advances and innovations just because we thought that somehow they were changing the world. The world will evolve and it'll change, and it's important that we remain the masters of that, and that we don't become the victim of the latest tech company who wants to sell us a little gimmick to make some money, which has happened a huge amount in education. There are all sorts of things that schools have been sold that in actual fact the research shows have had practically no influence on a child's learning or ability to do one thing or another. My point about it is, one, it's a little bit creepy. Two, there are legal issues which would have to be resolved. And three, it won't solve teacher workload at all, Tom. I don't think it'll have any effect on teacher workload one little bit. But I do think that it has the potential to make some people feel very uncomfortable, and I don't think it had much effect on kids' learning. So technology, great. This particular one, can't see it taking off myself.
Sorry, Yasmin, I'm just going to interrupt for a second. So hold your thought, because I wanted to talk to you about Hachette Learning. This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit www.hachetteLearning.com to explore the full range of titles. We've also got the Chalk and Talk podcast. If you're looking for another great education podcast, check out Chalk and Talk with Anna Stokey. Anna is a passionate advocate for evidence-based maths education for students of all ages. On her podcast, she talks about everything from effective teaching methods and how-to guides for teaching maths facts to tips for evaluating research shows claims. She brings on top-notch guests, educators, researchers and policymakers, and discusses issues that directly impact teachers and students. Chalk and Talk is for anyone interested in education. Find it wherever you get your podcasts. And then just a final one that I wanted to talk to you about was AQA, because AQA know teachers are the real experts in the classroom. That's why they work closely with teachers like you, combining your insight with their assessment expertise to create resources, tools, training and guidance that genuinely make a difference. They're the UK's most chosen assessment organisation, so chances are you already know their work. And as we head into a new school year, AQA is focused on helping teachers to feel supported and ready. If you want to know more about how they're working with teachers like you, just head to their website or search AQA, We Work with Experts.
Brilliant.
Yasmin.
Just before we move on to Yasmin, we've got comments from Darren who says, I think it makes us look egotistical, as if we're saying, I'm the only one who can deliver the content you need when there are plenty of tutors or videos which can help a child to catch up. It has to be me. Although, Darren, for example, Salman Khan, I think it was Khan, the Khan Academy, I can't remember who it was. No, it wasn't. It was Jim Bergman. Jim Bergman was the sort of guy behind Flip Learning, right? The guy who sort of created it all. He did a load of research on if the child, because he created lots of videos for Flip Learning for science. He did some research in terms of if the teacher's face is talking to the child versus if it's just a video without the actual teachers that they have face on it. And basically the results were that the teacher's face is always better because they feel like they already have some sort of connection or relationship with that teacher, which makes sense to me. But I do take your point as well. Anyway, that was Darren's comment. Paul says, who creates the intervention?
Exactly. That's what honestly, it's still, I mean, to be fair, I guess AI will do the bulk of it, but it's still going to be a middle leader, probably. It's still probably going to be the head of every department that's going to be responsible for making sure there's like a deep fake of everything in the specification. Like, that's ridiculous. And, we'll probably get to a point where teachers are going to be so annoyed when somebody is absent because I feel like it's going to increase workload because someone's going to have to make sure all of those videos exist and are uploaded. But I was also going to say, like, following on from Carl's point, I feel like on a safeguarding level, the concern I have is, like, I feel like deep fakes are a slippery slope, because where do you then draw the line, and how do you distinguish between what was genuinely created by your school and what wasn't? And like, I remember taking some of our pupils about a year ago to a school trip, on a school trip to Barclays in Canary Wharf, which is really close to us. And one of their senior managers was talking about how there was some sort of like cyber attack where somebody had made deep fakes of her and sent them to her team, basically requesting that some money is like transferred, and some of them genuinely believed that it was real, because apparently it looked really believable. And so for me, how will children learn to differentiate between what is genuine and what isn't? Like, that can, like, imagine if you've got a deep fake of your teacher, or that there are loads of malicious things that happen to teachers. It's really normal for school staff to be Googled, or for children to look for personal pictures of them or their family. I've worked in Peru's where I've seen children excluded for the images that they found of staff, like of the families of their staff, and what they've done or said about these pictures, or how they've shared them and spread them and things like that, or even edited them. So what's going to then happen? We're going to have more deep fakes of school staff saying or doing things that they haven't said or done. And I just feel like it's got the potential to generate more problems than it does to solve any. And I think that is along the lines of what Carl basically is saying.
I agree. I completely agree, because if you've already got that technology out there, you've got that deep fake image of your whatever it is, then we shouldn't underestimate the ability of young people to use technology and to manipulate it. And I think it's a slippery slope. And I also think if you introduce it now as a way of catching up children who've missed lessons, why not use it to cover lessons where the teacher's absent? And then why not end up using it just to teach in general? And then students don't need to go out of the house at all to go to school. And I just see it as a slippery slope, and it would take years, and I get that. But I just think if you start replacing the model of a teacher in a classroom with the students, somebody doing a catch up, I just think before long you end up with a situation where that becomes the next cut in costs. You know, if you didn't have to bus your special educational needs children all around the county to get to a school that was appropriate for them, because they can sit in front of a Deepfake in their own homes with the sort of facilities that they need on hand, I just see it as becoming a distancing of people from other people, and I don't like it. But I'm
not
old,
even sure.
so-
I know it's a good point, Lucy. I'm not even sure the teacher unions would swallow it, Tom. I think I can imagine the conversations in
I
the
love
union.
the fact you're all trying to persuade me on this now. It's like
No,
1v3.
no,
It's normally
I'm not-
I hate being the 1v3 guy. It's
I'm not
being the
against it though. I think
it sucks.
I'm
It
not.
sucks.
No, but Tom, I feel like if this was to start, I have concerns, but I'm not like against it. Like I'm not against
listen,
it.
right,
I would use it if I had an opportunity to, but like
on the deepfake video issue, that's going to happen anyway. There's technology out there right now where you can input images of a teacher that you could find on social media and probably find a clip of their voice from somewhere, input it in, and then Bob's your uncle, you've got a video of that teacher saying whatever you want them to say. Now, obviously, not every teacher that would apply to, because some aren't on social media at all, and some don't have anything to work from, right? So the whole deepfake thing, I think that's happening. That's going to happen anyway, regardless of this. You know, that technology is advancing. People can access that stuff. Does it make it more likely? Maybe. I don't know. I don't know is the honest answer. But
makes it easier, doesn't it?
It's going to happen anyway. It could do. It's going to happen anyway. Would be my argument. Because of the advancement of technology, the way it's going.
But if
yeah,
we
I mean, listen.
that it causes harms, and we recognise that deepfake technology is a problem, and if we recognise that it's very difficult sometimes to distinguish between what's real and what's not, which is why it would be a deep concern to some teachers, most people, that you could create a fake, but a very realistic fake of them doing something they shouldn't be doing, then maybe we need to say that any level of deepfake, which is, I believe what they were calling this, is just not something that we should be using or enabling. That if we keep that as a criminal enterprise, then that will define bad versus what should be out there.
Yeah, I mean, just because something's possible to abuse, and there are all sorts of things that are possible to abuse, and I agree, yes, it will happen. It is happening already, but that doesn't mean you enable it or you actually make it something that you actively contribute to. That's a slightly different sort of argument, I would say. I mean, but my main argument is, I mean, I get that you know, AI will do wonderful things.
So hang on, let me just ask you a question. If I'm teaching history now, and some of my and I at the start of the year sit down and say, you know what, some of my students are going to be off, and this is what I did 9 years ago, and I create a series of YouTube videos with me talking about content and setting work and doing some quizzing with me on them. And I then share those videos with those students to enable them to catch up on the work that they've missed because they were absent. How is that different to this?
Well, it's different in several fundamental ways, isn't it? One, it's you talking. It's not a made up version of you talking. Secondly, you put the time and effort in to make it happen. So obviously, in that sense, it's not, well, I mean, I suppose it is saving time because they can play it over again. But obviously it's not something that is going to be sold by tech companies as a solution that can, replace teachers, because teachers are doing it. There are no ethical questions about what you did, but there are big ethical questions about this. So I think it's not really analogous to say that what you did on the YouTube videos is the same as what this does. Besides which,
why isn't it though? I'm a bit lost.
I've just thrown a number of reasons. I've just said a number of reasons why it isn't analogous.
But if I input everything that I've written down or typed up on a particular topic that I would say, and then I input that into a clone of me, which is a digital version of me, and I input that in to a digital version of me, and that digital version of me does the video. So I'll give you an example. You've got videos on YouTube where a cartoon character says the same thing that a teacher has inputted in. So it doesn't look like the teacher, it's a cartoon character. Is there an issue with that?
No, but what's the point?
But what if the cartoon character looks like the teacher, but in a cartoon version?
But what's the point of doing that? What's the benefit? Who benefits?
We're talking about something to help children catch up. So that was the whole premise of this.
Why would it help? Why would it help children to catch up to put it in an avatar as opposed to have the real image?
Because when you create content for YouTube and other things, the more engaging it is, the better, isn't it? So by having a person, a thing, a character, whatever it is, then it's the same in any sort of educational content. If you've just got a voice behind text, reading out text, it's less engaging than having some sort of character or person or something, avatar, saying, actually talking to you.
No, but you said that you'd made YouTube videos. I assumed that you were on them.
On some of them, yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm saying, what's the difference?
Making it into an avatar?
Well, because I don't know. I guess you might want to, or it could be the ones where there is no you on, there's just text on them, and you want to make it a bit more engaging, and then you input it in, so you've actually got a character talking about whatever it is you talked about.
But it's not you. It's not you. It's something that's masquerading as you, speaking as it thinks you would speak. And what we know about all of these things, I don't know if you saw a few months ago, Sam Coates from Sky, AI uploaded the content of a podcast before he'd recorded it. And he had this conversation with it because he said, I haven't even done this yet. And initially it said, you have, because I've got it recorded here. And there was a conversation that ended with it saying, I'm really sorry, I shouldn't have done that before. It was a conversation. So how long before that avatar of Tom Rogers that starts off teaching as Tom would do begins to evolve into an alternative Tom Rogers, over whom Tom Rogers has no control over what it says anymore? Because that's the problem with these intelligent things, is that they evolve and they begin to form opinion. And the fact that this AI thing was able to lie and then backtrack exactly as a human would was really quite alarming. And so I think we have to be really careful. And we are talking about children here. We're not talking about something where we're using it in a business sense or something where adults can make up their own minds. We're talking about children, and their safeguarding is paramount. And so therefore it needs to be humans talking to them and not AI. And we need to
cartoons are out then. Cartoons are out.
But cartoons have been made and produced.
Not a human though.
Sorry?
It's not a human.
No, but it's not AI either, is it? Which
it has. Cartoons can be AI generated.
Well then no, I don't think they should be. Let's go back to
so
Tom
anything
Jerry,
AI generated is out. Anything that's had AI work. So that means don't watch Netflix anymore. Don't watch any BBC series.
No, she's not saying that. She's not saying that. That's straw man. That's not right. She's not saying that.
Has anyone seen Black Mirror?
Yes.
Because I feel like what you just said there, Lucy, reminds me of that. I mean, I couldn't finish. I watched, I think, the latest season a couple of months ago where there was that teacher who had something wrong with her brain, and they put that technology in her brain, and she had to keep getting like subscription upgrades to like function normally, and I just had to turn it off. Like I don't know, it was a bit too much.
It is frightening. I haven't seen that one, but
it reminds what you just said.
I just think it's not really going to help. It's just a little bit of a gimmick. It's not going to help.
I agree.
I don't know. All I'm trying to say is that the idea of a student who is going to be catching up on work that they've missed, having an edition of the teacher's video talking to them about that work.
No.
I don't see it
personally. I think social theories, actually, there are loads of social theories that suggest people, it's human nature to engage better with something that is familiar or just simply has a pair of eyes. So
sure it is, and we can fake that up to a point, but really when we look down at the problems that kids have in getting into school, this is very, very low in the order of priority. I think Lucy said that these kids have already rejected education. They're not going to come suddenly running in and say, oh great, now there's an avatar of Mr. Rogers, I'll be a perfect student. I'll learn loads of stuff.
Yeah.
They're not.
I
They're
didn't
not.
say that. I didn't say
No,
it would change the game in terms of behavioural attitudes to learning. And actually, I caveated everything I said by saying that, you know, I think that technology isn't, you know, I don't think students engage as well with technology as they do with humans. I mean, they just don't, right? And that has been proven time again. But if that's better than nothing, or better than just worksheets, or better than a catch up from this textbook at home, does it make it better for them in that sense to have?
I am not sure whether it is better than those things. I think
it may not be. I'm just
I
posing the
think
question. They obviously think it is. This trust.
I don't know whether they do. I mean, I think there's no doubt somebody making some money out of this, and there's certainly a lot of publicity that's been generated from it. Maybe somebody does have this kind of, you know, utopian view that it'll be wonderful as an innovation and it'll engage kids in a way that, you know, other methods haven't. But I have to say, I seriously doubt that. And I just think that because it raises so many ethical and legal questions, which are much wider. And it was interesting, you started on the point of how teachers and unions are, you know, are desperate for teachers to have reduced workload. I actually do agree hugely with that in that sense, but I don't think this is going to solve it. And I think the unions will be the first in line to object to it, because they would see, a bit like the Hollywood actors unions did a few years ago, that it has the potential to actually undermine their value. And so far from being supporters, I think most teachers would find this to be A, little bit creepy, B, completely unnecessary, and a whole lot of hassle for a very, very marginal and arguable gain.
Darren's commented, if a school decides it's going to trademark our likeness to protect the AI videos, then things like Teachers Talk Radio end, because we can no longer use our own likeness to talk about education. Oh, Darren, dearie me. Yeah, you could be right. I think everything's going to end soon. We're in massive huge trouble.
Happy Sunday, everyone.
It's
next topic, guys. This is enough now. Next
all
topic.
right. Let's move on from AI to something more cheery, to something more to something more fun. So we've got a story that emerged midweek, and it was a story that was originally an exclusive in The Guardian. Nigel Farage accuses teachers of poisoning our kids on race issues. Nigel Farage has claimed teachers would go on strike within weeks of a Reform UK election win, and accused them of poisoning children by telling them that black children are victims and white children are oppressors. The Reform UK leader set out his view on British schools in an event for a private US Christian college in Michigan, claiming that the Marxist left was now in control of our education system. He said, "I'm anticipating a teacher strike very quickly after winning the next election. They're poisoning our kids. They're telling them to be ashamed of their country. They're telling little Johnny, who's 8, who is black, that he is a victim, and little Oliver, who is white, who is 8, that he is an oppressor. They are dividing us, not uniting us. They are feeding the negative culture in." This has got quite the response. We've had responses from some of the major unions on this, including Daniel Kebede, who obviously dismissed it as far right and racist, and he dismissed Farage as a pound shop Donald Trump, and yeah, lots of other responses. So what do we think on this one? We talked about this, we touched on this about a month or so, about 6 weeks ago, didn't we? It was a similar comment from another Reform UK MP. I can't remember who it was. Was it Lee Anderson maybe? Who said about brainwashing. It was a similar sort of thing. Any thoughts on this?
Yes, obviously. Yes, there are thoughts on this. I mean, my view is, I think the Trumpism thing, you know, he came in sort of saying everyone's going to hate me, you're all going to do this, I'm going to make you do this. Farage is trying to do the same thing. I don't know why you would, if you genuinely thought you were going to form the next government, why you would want to try and alienate an enormous area of your workforce, the education of your students, of the children that are coming through, you know, and try and sort of almost encourage the idea of strikes for sensationalism's sake and nothing more. At the end of the day, of course, teachers wouldn't go go on strike unless there was something to strike for. I think it even says in the article that, you know, it has to be under agreed parameters. There are rules about it. You can't just not go to work because you don't like the new government. You can't do that. In my view, I think it's just there's no education information coming out from reform. I don't think they've probably even been into schools, spoken to teachers. I doubt if they even know about the curriculum. I think what we have to be aware of is that at the moment, according to polls, they look set to potentially take Wales next year. And education is a devolved area in Wales, and they will have to run an education system in Wales. And it's an education system that is struggling massively because they didn't take on the changes that were made in England. They have a very different system over there, and it appears to be failing. So reform will potentially be taking on a failing education system. So the last thing, the very fact that he doesn't even mention that, he talks about after winning the next general election, tells me he's not even really aware of what he's putting his candidates in Wales up for from May next year in terms of running an education system. This is going to start for them potentially much sooner than the next general election. So that kind of talk might be flippant and fine to say now because it's several years away from that election. He's forgetting that they could be running, or they believe that they could be running education in Wales from next year. So I think it's totally inappropriate. I think that it's very worrying, deeply concerning that they have not spoken in any way about education other than the areas of education to do with sex education and to do with critical race theory and those kind of things. I think it's really concerning because they could be running it soon.
Yeah. Given that the last, well, because they'd have to rewrite the national curriculum is the first thing. So there are certain practical obstacles to overcome in changing what is taught in schools, but and that would take, well, probably a year to 18 months, depending on how much effort they put into it. But given that the last national curriculum was signed off by Mr. Michael Gove, Dominic Cummings, and Nick Gibb, I don't think we can really say they were Marxist flag bearers. I think that would be, you know, even their strongest critic wouldn't suggest that. So I think it's a bit fantastical to start suggesting that you know, the curriculum as it currently is constructed is somehow a branch of you know, Marxist revolutionaries. Having said all of that, I mean, leave the politics in terms of what you think about the way. I'm a history teacher, so obviously it would have a major effect on me, but leave out the whole question of whose interpretation of what period of history, you know, you want to pick, which is always a hot potato. This is about having a curriculum that we've had in this country, which principally, regardless of which government's in office, tries or attempts to take a balanced approach and allows all opinions and all interpretations to be explored in a safe and healthy way. What this would be suggesting is that, in fact, the curriculum then be geared towards the worldview of one political party, and in such a fashion as you could effectively call schools then another arm of a propaganda state, of an authoritarian state. And I think that would be obviously a very, very worrying development. But I don't think people necessarily appreciate that. And I think Lucy's right. I think there's a lot of grandstanding here. There's a lot of sweeping statements here. In actual fact, there's very little substance, very little detail. And I suspect that even if, you know, politically they were successful and did form a government, I suspect that the reality of what they would do would be a very, very watered down version of what they're claiming they would do at the moment.
I think he's made a career out of, you know, these like shock factor kind of vague statements. You know, he did the same thing during the referendum, and you know, I remember that clearly, and he's doing the same thing again. And you know, unfortunately, like at present, it's Black History Month. You know, I don't think the timing of this is random. And I just think he sensationalizes things all the time. But unfortunately, that gets votes and, you know, maybe even, I mean, that gets views and maybe down the line also votes. And I think for me, since Brexit, there's definitely been a shift where I feel like this, you know, saying it as it is culture has become more mainstream, you know, with the likes of people like Trump and like Katie Hopkins and all kinds of people. I think being able to say these outrageous or offensive things that marginalize people has become a lot more normal and mainstream than it was previous to that. That's my view. And I mean, on the one hand, I do feel like he is sensationalizing a lot of things. He's being deliberately vague because for me, it's linked to a lot of things. You know, this idea in the country that, you know, flags need to be put up, you know, children who are wearing a Union Jack dress or whatever, you know, get sent home from school. And, you know, I feel like it's linked to a lot of what he did during Brexit. But at the same time, I do feel like even amongst all of that, I do also feel like a lot of people kind of miss a trick or are being quite ridiculous themselves when they brand everyone who supports reform as racist. I don't think that's actually true. I just think I just feel like Nigel Farage aims to appeal to the most extreme group of people, but I wouldn't say that everybody who votes for or everybody who agrees with or supports reform is a racist. And so at the same time, I do feel like for me, I am also a bit bored of when people, like when I was reading Daniel from the NEU, when I was reading his response, I do feel like you will never see a response to reform from a prominent person who doesn't just say, oh, that, you know, this is racism.
I agree with that.
I want to hear something different. Like to call
I agree with
everybody
that. Take him down on the arguments. Actually argue that instead of just going, you're a racist, you're a racist. You know, Daniel Kebede's reaction, you're a racist. It's not. You know, at the end of the day, at the moment, the polls in the UK are clear. Reform have 34%. They're leading. Labour have 22%. The Conservatives have 14%. Green have 12%. Lib Dems have 12%. So if we can't engage with the argument and actually, you know, like we're trying to do now here, and actually talk about what he's saying, rather than just say he's this, he's that. Then,
that's my
lose.
issue.
You lose.
That's my issue. I feel like I would like to see. I feel like a lot of people are missing a trick here. Like I've started to read up on some of, you know, reform's proposed policies, and I feel like I've seen policies, you know, potential policies they have on things like taxation and all sorts of things that are really, like, I feel like will make a lot of people like me a lot worse off. And you know, I feel like there's always this focus on just branding them as racist, and nobody really ever says, well, if reform were to win, this is what's likely to happen if you're a teacher, or if you're a person on benefits, or if you're a person with a disability, if you're, you know, just, you never really hear anybody talking about.
They're not saying it themselves.
Else.
Yeah, the problem is they don't have a policy. That's they don't have a policy to actually get stuck into. That all they've got is sound bites as it currently stands.
Yeah, but that's what I'm.
Yeah.
Well, of course, yeah, I know, but like at this, I feel like everything in response to reform is just ad hom. You know, it's ad hom. It's just calling them racist, and you know, considering how popular they are in things like polls, I just feel like for me, it would be good to see an engagement and a response. It would be nice to see somebody actually responding and saying, you know, the curriculum isn't brainwashing children. Like, you know, there could have even have been a mention of the fact that it's currently Black History Month and all the great things that schools, you know, do to celebrate so many different things within SMSE or, you know, within PSHE or the curriculum, but there's just nothing except calling them racist.
Well, if I might add, Yasmin, if schools have been trying to indoctrinate children for the last 30 years, they've done a pretty bad job of it, because obviously, as Tom said, 34% of the population are actually intending to vote reform. So they haven't been very successful in the indoctrination methods.
I think it's clear that. Sorry, Lucy, I'll let you come in. This is very brief from me. I was just going to say, I think it's clear that anybody correct me if I'm wrong here. Their key election issue is immigration, right? So that's their thing. That's probably why they have got a good chunk of that 34% is on that key issue of immigration.
Yeah, but it's not. But it's not the only thing that they've shared. Like I researched it. Like, unless I'm wrong, it's not the only thing that they shared. And I just feel like,
no.
Yes, I get it. Immigration is their big thing, and that is the appeal. I do feel like a lot of it is fueled by hatred for other people and capitalizing on that. And the fact that my personal view is people are a lot worse off because of the 14 years of the Tories. I feel like it made poor people a lot poorer. It put a lot of people in a worse position, and migrants and ethnic minorities and all sorts of different vulnerable groups are now being blamed for that. But I just think, because of the fact that there is no real response to anything, that there's no substantial response to reform that I've seen from people that is widespread. And I've got a serious issue with that. Like, every time I see somebody approached for comment to respond to something sensationalist that's come from Nigel Farage, I just find the response so inadequate, and I'm somewhat like struggling with that.
Can I please just talk to you about the show's sponsors? So Hachette Learning, the show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit www.hachetteLearning.com to explore the full range of titles. And also AQA, because AQA know that teachers are the real experts in the classroom. That's why they work closely with teachers like you, combining your insight with their assessment expertise to create resources, tools, training and guidance that genuinely make a difference. They're the UK's most chosen assessment organisation, so chances are you already know their work. And as we head into the new school year, AQA are focused on helping teachers feel supported and ready. If you want to find out more about how they're working with teachers like you, just head to their website or search AQA, We Work with Experts. I wanted just to have another say on this, because I think we're in danger of straying away from the main topic of conversation, which is the fact that Nigel Farage has, in saying that teachers will almost certainly go on strike, that's laying down the the gauntlet to teachers. Go on, do it, I dare you. And it's a dangerous game to play, because it would actually shut down the economy in a large way, because although schools are not childminders, if you don't have anywhere for your children to go, you can't go to work. So I think that's one thing to point out. So it's a dangerous gauntlet to lay down. I think it's dangerous to do so, as I said, shortly before they plan to take control of a government that runs an education system that is failing at the moment. So I think there are real concerns over that. I agree with Yasmin. I think you're absolutely right that the blanket response to their sort of blanket statements is just racist, and people do need to dig into things more, and they need to understand more. I feel that the media have a huge role to play in that, and they are not playing that role at the moment. They do not question them, they do not put them under scrutiny. Anything that even remotely looks like scrutiny is met with very sort of short-tempered responses, or boring, as he said to one journalist once. This has become a fashionable way to do politics. Is very popular amongst a lot of people at the moment, because they feel as though they've been ignored by politicians for a long time. And these are people that speak like me, and it's a huge problem that we face at the moment. But as I said, I think the idea that you can start almost telling teachers you're not going to like me and you're not going to be able to stop me, I think is a huge concern, because the general repercussions across all sectors is enormous.
His comments sort of focused in, didn't they, on critical race theory? And Daniel Kebede said, I don't, and nor does my union, and nor does the teaching profession push critical race theory as he's suggesting. Do we have any thoughts on that? On sort of critical race? I mean, his main point was about critical race theory being pushed across the sector, and he's basically saying that, you know, I actually did a show on Tuesday about immigration, race, and St. George's flags. You can catch up with it on YouTube if you want to. It was very good. I had head teacher and a co-CEO of a trust on, both talking about what they're doing to try and deal with, manage the current sort of trends and situations that we find out there. And one of the examples that we sort of gave in that conversation of something where, you know, we were talking about facts, opinions, things that are contested, you know, and one of those things was, you know, one of the examples we sort of ended up on was when people make statements that they believe are factual, but there are then a whole bunch of people that believe they are contested, and they, you know, and the example we gave was calling a party fascist. So, you know, one of the things that I think Zach Polanski? I can't remember his name. The leader of the Green Party. I'm pretty sure on Question Time he said that Zia Yusuf, I think he's the Reform UK MP, he called him fascist, right? And, you know, Zia Yusuf was like, I'm not fascist. And Zach Polanski's like, yes, you are, right? So would a teacher in a school describe Reform UK as a fascist party?
I've no idea. I mean, I don't think that teachers in schools should be talking about political parties in the first place. That is not the role, unless you're teaching politics to an age group of children that it's appropriate to, or students that it's appropriate to talk to. You shouldn't be talking about political parties. If there's a general election, I know there's a general buzz around, but teachers should not be sharing opinions. So teachers, you know, there are.
But that's not sharing an opinion. That's not necessarily an opinion. That's just where you identify the political strands of different parties. So you might say this is a Liberal Party, this is a whatever party. This is where they sit on a political spectrum. So I think politics teachers would definitely need to do that. And probably there might be examples in history, for example, where you know, where you're doing Germany in the 20s or 30s, and you do a spectrum, you try and compare, you know, you try and say, well, this is sort of where they fit on the spectrum, you know, and I don't know.
Go on, Carl.
No. Sorry, Liz. I was just going to say, I mean, I've taught politics for several decades and history at GCSE and A level. And yes, you absolutely do. And if you were looking at the word fascist as you would in, say, A level history, never mind politics, more likely history actually than politics. But if you were doing that, you would analyze what various academics describe as being a definition, and then you would look at whether that definition applied in one case or another. That's a legitimate academic exercise. You're not saying whether you support that party or that viewpoint. You're just saying, is this word the correct way of describing this arrangement? And I think that's a different thing. Now, Zach Polanski is perfectly within his rights to be able to use a description that he thinks is right. So I don't think that in itself is wrong. I mean, you know, I would tend to agree with his view of it, but it's kind of irrelevant really to what we're discussing here, which is that what we're discussing here is that Farage would make it, or he alleges that he would make it specifically a requirement that you taught a particular worldview. And I think that's where the issue lies, because we've never had that in this country before.
Is critical thinking a worldview, though? Because that's what he says, that he wants them to teach.
Critical race. You mean critical race theory?
No, he says.
Critical thinking. All right. Okay.
Well, he says something
towards
about
the bottom. It's towards the bottom.
Purpose of education should be to teach critical thinking. And I picked up on that because I thought, well, no, it's not actually. The purpose of education is to give children or students a wide introduction into the history, geography, the sciences, maths, all of, English, all of those things, for them to be able to work out what they like, what they don't like, and to be able to sort of put themselves into the subject areas that they want to continue to study or not, and then go and work within. So, for me, I think it is important that we teach critical thinking. I don't think critical thinking belongs to any particular political party whatsoever, does it? I think that that's just a general skill, and I do think that we've lost that. And actually, at a time, we've spoken about deepfake today, and we've spoken about things like this before, at a time where children are being presented, and I keep saying children, young people are being presented with so much information with no filter. It's not like when I was younger, the BBC had already filtered it, or ITV, or Channel 4, the only channels that were available, they had filtered the information that was shared, and so you knew if they said it on the news. It's not quite like that now. There's so many information sources. So I think it's really important. I've made sure, particularly with my youngest, because my two older sons didn't need this. They grew up just outside of that age group. But for my daughter, I've always questioned, well, why do you think that? Well, where did you see that? Why have you checked whether it's real? I do think that that is a skill that we need to teach, and it's certainly not belonging to reform for certain.
I mean, the reason I brought that whole thing of the definition of fascism and party up is because in the context of critical race theory in schools, they're arguing, Farage, Reform, people in that sort of community are arguing that the ideas behind critical race theory were taught as fact or have been taught as fact, as factual by teachers, rather than as a contested idea. That's what they're arguing. They're not saying, so is that true or not? Is what
I think the answer to that
varies.
is, varies. Yes, I mean, I think all ideas. Sorry, Yasmin. I'll make it brief. All ideas have an impact on what people say and the way they present things, and it would be impossible to untangle those. But to say that consciously that's what people are doing, and they're consciously trying to plug one line of thinking, that's a gross simplification and misrepresentation of what happens. Sorry, Yasmin.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is a misrepresentation, but I do also think there is huge variation in views amongst teachers and maybe what they think is acceptable or not acceptable to share. And that in itself as well, for me, is a concern. Like, I remember during the first lockdown, I think, when there was the murder of George Floyd, and there was like a huge rise in discussions around critical race theory on social media. And in response to that, I'm pretty sure a lot of schools started to like, I remember getting emails from school, just for staff, not to students, but for staff, discussing race, and also even things like, I remember that was the first time I openly saw a discussion about the drop in the number of ethnic minorities in senior leadership, or how they're disproportionately absent from like, it led to a lot of things, and then a lot of discussions. And then I remember, I think it was Kemi Badenoch or somebody, basically maybe she was the equalities minister at the time, but I remember the government basically saying that it's unacceptable to, the concept of white privilege is unacceptable, and these things shouldn't be discussed in schools, etc. And then as a result of that, I believe in the September, there was new guidance in schools around political impartiality. And so I think that is probably going to crop up again at some point. But I think for me, I do think discussion is always really important amongst staff. I think, being able to talk about things the same way that we do now is of extreme importance. And I think for teachers as well, a lot of the time teachers don't even feel comfortable talking about a lot of these things because, there is really never any training. There's been so many times as a form tutor or as a union rep, I've known teachers that haven't felt comfortable approaching certain topics because they're not exactly sure about what the right thing or the wrong thing to say is. And so, I mean, I've kind of gone off topic now, but I think for me, I don't think anyone would be surprised to see Nigel Farage attacking, schools, but I think ultimately, just what I want to say is, I think for me, the NEU at least need to actually talk to their members and to teachers about this in a better way than they have.
I agree with that. I agree with that point. On that point, I agree with everything you said. Actually, I do think teachers are nervous about saying things now. I know a teacher a few weeks ago, head of department, who has had a complaint against them from a parent based on a history lesson they were teaching on the 1930s. And they complained about something he said or the way he presented information in the lesson or whatever, right? What I'm basically saying, I said this on Tuesday as well, is there's a lot of tripwires now. There's way more tripwires than there were maybe 15 years ago for teachers when they're talking about issues. And is that a good thing or bad thing?
It's a bad thing, and
I think it's a bad thing, but I wondered what you thought.
Me too.
It's a bad thing, but I think I would contest the 15 years, Tom. It's been going on a lot longer than that, to be frank with you. But having said all of that, in the current environment, I get what you're saying. It's febrile, the environment, and people are very quick to raise issues and very quick to make complaints, and the law then gets itself tied in knots with these things. And obviously school leadership teams are frightened of the possible reaction and repercussions, so they then deal with it inappropriately, and some people can be vilified unfairly, and I think those things are unhelpful, and they're part of a wider malaise. So in reaction to that, but sorry, somebody was going to come in, so I'll let them go.
Well, actually, I think we're out of time, Cole. But it was a really good conversation, really good debate. Really enjoyed it, and we've had lots of comments. Thanks, Carla, as well, for commenting. Sorry we didn't get to read your comments out. Paul, Darren, Chris, and a few other people. So thank you very much for joining in with Points of View. And we'll be back again next Sunday to discuss more of the opinions and stories that matter in the education world. Thank you very much for joining us. This will be available, of course, as a podcast as well. So make sure you follow Teachers Talk Radio. Give us a like, give us a subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Big shout to Hachette and AQA for supporting the show today. And we'll see you next week. Bye, everyone. See you later.
Bye.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.